Hi, guys. My name is Samantha Schrantz. I am a private investigator. I tend to focus on criminal defense investigations. I'm also on the DPSST Private Security and Private Investigator Policy Committee Board. And I've been doing that for about a year now. Um, I've been a private investigator for about 5 years. This April upcoming will be my fifth year. I will do juvenile, state, federal, and retained criminal cases. But I kind of specialize in the Measure 11 crimes. I was able to get my 1,500 hours and my full license right off the bat in 2019 because I had 9 months as a police officer recruit for the University of Oregon Police Department. I was able to make it 3 of the 4 months at the police academy before I was sent home for insubordination. And that's a conversation for another time. But essentially, I left the police academy and then I went back and finished my degree at the University of Oregon. And so I have my bachelor's in science, and my major was in general social sciences with an emphasis on crime, law, and society. And then my minor was in women, gender, and sexuality studies. And so my bachelor's degree was able to count for 1/5 of the 1,500 hours. And then my 9 months as a police recruit was able to qualify the other 4/5 of my 1,500 hours. I am also a qualified mental health designated because of my time as a residential counselor, from working in an acute psychiatric youth facility, working with homicidal and suicidal youth. I did that for about a year as well. I am also currently working on my master's in psychology. I have focused a lot of my life and career around education. However, I found that most private investigators have just a lot of law enforcement or federal agent background. Um, I'm not going to say which is better, which is worse. I just think that because of my background in education, I have a little bit different of a perspective and view of things than I feel a lot of the retired law enforcement do. However, they still do an incredible job, and I really believe that anyone doing criminal defense investigations is, doing the work that needs to be done. I didn't know much about the career going into it. I just really felt that my calling was to be a police detective. And when that didn't work out, I didn't really know where to go. And then I stumbled upon the idea of being a private investigator. And so then I Googled private investigators in Eugene. And I called a few of them. A lot of them weren't willing to talk with me, actually. I was told that this is a very lone wolf profession. And so a lot of people didn't want to work with me. Luckily, one person, his name was Rich Hersey, he's been doing this job for like 25 plus years. He was willing to sit down with me and have a conversation. And he told me all about the career, what it was like, what it meant to be an investigator. And he really just helped me kind of figure out this is what I wanted to do. And then he helped walk me through the application process, helped me get my license, and then trained me for about a year and a half. And so I am so thankful for him, and he is an incredible investigator as well. A big part of my job is just going through all of the discovery with clients, and then I take notes or write important questions down that I need to get to the attorney. And so eventually the attorney's going to have to obviously review everything on their own. But if I do it with the client, I feel like that really just cuts down the time that the attorney is having to put into it, if that makes sense. And then just as far as like utilizing investigators in general goes, is interviewing clients and witnesses. When I start an investigation, I like to start with reviewing the discovery, and then I get the client's version of events. And then I try to figure out based on what the client says. Then I guess I essentially do what the police detective does, right? Like I take my client's version of events, I take that as whole truth, and then I investigate the case as my client's version of events goes, right? And so then through my investigation, sometimes things won't add up or they will. And that's just kind of also another way that I can figure out what is factual and kind of what's going on is just, working with the client, talking to the people they want. And then a lot of the time, too, it's like a wild goose chase. And so if attorneys were doing that, I feel like it would just be a lot of wasted time and effort on the attorney's part because they have so much to do and so much going on all the time. Um, and then I would also say another thing that could be helpful is like mitigation and interviewing of family members. Like if you do get to a point in an investigation or a case where you're like, hey, everything the client's saying seems to be untrue, or you get to the point where a client's even like admitting to you that they did what they're accused of, right? Then essentially your investigation changes to a mitigation investigation, right? And that's where we're going to spend a lot of time collecting records, collecting like police records, school records, all sorts of stuff like that, to really kind of make a story for who the client is and how they got to where they did, if that makes sense. And then something else I wanted to touch on is document service. You can definitely get process servers to do document service, and that is great. And a lot of the time, that's what you need for a situation. However, there are I would say like higher risk and more difficult serves. And those are the times that I would definitely look into hiring an investigator, right? An investigator can, so let's say the attorney's office just even has just a name, right? An investigator can find the name, usually use the DMV, use court records, use other databases that they have access to find alternative addresses or potential phone numbers, or even I've like found partners and then found partners' addresses and then served people at their current partner's address. And so there are more resources that investigators have access to as far as serving goes. And then I kind of had a quick story about that. I had a job out of Portland. They hired me to do a serve, and I was the second investigator to go out there, and there were already two process servers that had already gone out there before me. It was a secured property, and the house was like up a hill on this no trespassing property. And so a lot of process servers and the previous investigator had sat for hours on end, just at the end of the road, kind of waiting for this truck to come down the street. I ended up when I got there, the gate happened to be open. So I drove all the way up to the top of the property and I ended up at the house, right? I was able to take photos of the cars that were in the driveway. So I knew what cars would be leaving that house and which ones wouldn't. I went to the door. There were cameras everywhere that I noticed immediately. I went to the door. I ended up knocking. No one came. And so I put my business card in the door at the house. And then 10, 15 minutes later, I got a phone call from the person that I was trying to serve. And he informed me that he had watched me on his cameras, placed the card in his door, and he contacted me and let me know that I was trespassing and that he was going to call the local sheriff's department. And I said, go right ahead, please do. I've actually had that happen to me before where the police were called on me and the police just actually helped me serve the documents anyway. So I was like, please do go right ahead and call the police on me. And then I was like, but while you're at it, can I get together with you? Can I get you these documents? And he's like, no, you can't. He was real mad, right? So long story short, he sent a car out his driveway. I followed it like a half a mile down the street and then realized that it was probably a decoy car. So then I turned around and came back. And when I did that, he was leaving his house. And so I flipped a U-turn and I ended up following him 13 miles. I was contacting the person I was in contact with the legal assistant who was like helping me with all the information and stuff and just letting her know like a play by play, like I made contact, this is what's going on. I ended up following him for 13 miles, and I ended up like getting cut off, and it was like this whole ordeal, right? But because I did that, and because I left the card, and now he was worried that like someone was following him all the time, he got an attorney. That attorney got in hold of the attorney that I was working for, and they were able to serve the documents. And then also, when it came time for them to go to court, I was notified that I would potentially be testifying. But luckily, in this situation, I wrote an extremely detailed report with everything. I had photos. I was able to support all of my claims with timestamps, phone calls, etc. And so then when they ended up having court, he didn't try to contradict anything in my report, and everything was able to like go through and work out. And I didn't even need to testify to what I did. And so like that's another thing too, is especially being in the criminal defense world, when we do serves like this, I just know how important it is to articulate everything that you're doing. And I mean, in the business, we call it CYA, like cover your ass. So essentially, just make sure that you have proper documentation for everything. And so that has been something that's been really successful for me, is just making sure to write everything down and have a detailed account of everything that's happening for work. And I assume that you're going to get something similar probably with a process server, but I don't think that typically process servers go quite above and beyond to that level. And so, yeah, I would highly recommend potentially hiring investigators for your more difficult serves. So I will talk about like what I do mostly in criminal defense cases, because that's what I'm most familiar with. I do occasionally do like family law cases and other stuff like that. But I'll talk about that in a second. It's not my preferred work. Generally, in family law cases, there's a lot of emotions involved and a lot of people with lots of feelings, and so that's I try to stay away from that, because I'm at the end of the day, I'm not trying to like surveil someone who's cheating or like do anything like that. But okay, I'll get back there. Sorry. So I would say that one of the biggest things I do in criminal defense cases is contradiction tables. A lot of the times the alleged victims are give multiple accounts of their story, and so one thing that's been like really helpful for me, and I think it's part of like because my brain compartmentalizes things, but I've learned that like when I end up breaking things down into palatable ways that I can understand it, the attorney and the defense team also tends to be able to understand it and digest it a little easier. And so I've been doing these contradiction tables. I do one on almost every case that goes to trial and oftentimes before trial, but I essentially go through every single version of events that someone gives, and then I will section it down into what happened. Like, so and so came home, so and so went into the bed, so and so put their hands on me, and then I'll break it up into different sections, and then I will grab quotes from every version of events about everything that happened. And so I would say that that's one of the biggest things that has been helpful in defense investigations, is really just becoming super familiar with this version of events and everything that's going on, and being able to dissect things and put that time into nitpicking contradictions that I feel like attorneys want to be able to do, but they just realistically don't have the time, especially with the fact that everyone is so underrepresented right now, as well. Timelines. I love timelines. Um, Going through discovery can be really difficult. And especially when they're like, there will be like the introductory report, right? Where the first officer is talking about what happened. And then maybe another officer, or it'll be the first officer's version of events in their first police reports. And then it'll be another police report, and the timeline will be back, and it's really confusing for my brain. And so one thing I love to do is to just go through the discovery, go through every page. And I actually do this when I review discovery. I tend to review it on my iPad, and then like I go through and like all of the dates I like highlight in green. So anytime there's a date mentioned, I'll highlight in green. Anytime a person's mentioned, like a new name that I haven't seen before, I'll highlight it in blue. And then I'll go through and I'll highlight addresses in like orange. And so then I have it color coded. So then when I'm doing my timeline or I'm going back through the discovery, I can essentially just look for these green highlight marks. And that's when I know where there's a date that's important to put into the timeline. And so I would also say that, like, and then also on the timeline, obviously, I put in the discovery where it is. Normally, it's helpful to get transcripts. I'll put what page and what line that statement is so that the attorney can always double check or find it in trial if they need it. And so just making sure to be very clear and concise about where everything is. As far as timelines, contradiction tables, indexing as well. I've had a lot of cases with a ton of DHS records, and so I've been creating an index for those, writing just like what kind of records they are, who the person is writing the record, who the kid is for, what kind of record it is, if it's a complaint, if it's like a daily log, if it's this, that, and the other, and just like writing everything down so that the attorney essentially just has like a cheat sheet to the DHS records and like knowing where everything is. I'd say, like, at the end of the day, my whole goal as an investigator is to really just do as much tedious, time consuming work for the attorney as possible so that they essentially just have a cheat sheet to like their entire discovery. In a perfect world, that's what I would say like the main function of my job is just really just helping the attorney out as much as possible. And then, like I said, also just reviewing video, right? All the attorneys are going to have to go through their video regardless. But something that I've been able to do, right, is I can even just go through and write down like what times the officer comes into the room, what time officers mute their body cameras, what time they're actually talking to people. And so essentially another situation where I'm creating a cheat sheet for the attorney to be able to like go through discovery more easily and more accessibly, with the limited time and availability that they have. And then, okay, I will go back to talking about family law cases and civil cases. I will do them. I prefer generally, like with serves and stuff, I tend to prefer the ones that are like more difficult, the ones that they've already sent a couple process servers out to and they just can't do it. And then I'll do it. But I have ended up in the middle of a lot of weird family cheating situations, and yes, it all pays the same, but it like kills my soul a little bit. One situation that I will generally agree to though is if there's a kiddo involved, right? So let's say mom or dad has like primary custody and the other parent is like, I'm really concerned. Mom's new boyfriend, I'm pretty sure, is a pedophile and does drugs all the time, and my kid's not safe, right? If I have an attorney in a family law case that like comes to me and says that stuff, then I kind of just turn it more into like a criminal investigation. Like I would do the same things for that parent or the partner that I would do in any criminal defense case. So I would take it just as seriously. And kind of do the same thing, right? We do the background investigation, we see where they've lived. And then what I'll do, so I'll like take the name and then I'll see all the different places they've lived. And then I will do court records for them. And then I will do potentially police contacts, especially for anyone in the Eugene Springfield area. I'll always do Springfield, EPD, and LCSO for contacts to see who is potentially talking to these people, right? You can just do a contact, like a name scan or like a list of all contacts that that agency has had with that person, and you're going to get everything. And then it normally also lists how they're involved on the call, right? If they're the suspect, if they're the caller, if they're just involved. And then that's a really good way to see what else could be there, right? Before you just like request records or you're just going blind, you can just always ask for contacts. And then once I get that contact sheet lit back, I'll go through and I'll find everything that I think is potentially helpful or that can make a case or a story for who this person is. Yeah, essentially, if I'm doing a family case and I'm looking into someone, I'm going to do a full background like that, figure out where they live, figure out what police they might have come in contact with, figure out what other people are doing. And ultimately, anytime you have someone where you think they're not telling the truth, or that there's some information missing, or there's just something you don't quite know about someone, that's always going to be a really good time to use an investigator, because they're going to potentially find things out and help create a more whole story for the attorney and the assistants and stuff too. Yeah, no, I absolutely adore what I do, and I can't imagine doing anything else. It was definitely falling into the right place. It was one of those things where like I never felt like I was like good enough, or supervisors always had issues with me, or like it was one of those things where I never really fit in. And then when I found this, it was like, oh, this fits me so well. I think the biggest issue, honestly, that I'm seeing is just the lack of consistency amongst investigators. It's amazing to me, different investigators, and then there's just no like, there's no real like overboard that's like looking at people and what they're doing, or like making sure that the work is consistent or of a certain quality. And so I think that's also how I've been able to specialize kind of in like measure 11s and more serious crimes and retain cases, is just because a lot of people will reach out to me for like niche investigations. Unfortunately, I've gotten quite the reputation for myself working sex cases, especially child sex cases, unfortunately, because it's way easier for me to approach the situation or communicate with people involved as a younger female investigator. Whereas, unfortunately, a lot of the investigators in the community are in their 50s plus, and they're retired feds and cops. And it's just a completely different, I would say, energy about the investigation, especially with my background and like wanting to learn and research and psychology. Like, I'm really looking at every person involved as like their own, they have their own experience and their own things going on. And I believe to fully understand a situation, you have to understand each individual to figure out what's actually going on. And I feel like a lot of the times, a lot of police officers, unfortunately, aren't able to do that just because of the way their training and experience is generally. But I also don't want to over assume about police officers. They do a great job. Oh, I think something else. Recently, I've been telling this to people about my views on like federal investigations versus state investigations. I love doing both. But the thing about the federal investigations is I'm never going to find the smoking gun, and I'm never going to find the piece of evidence that the feds completely missed, and or the person they didn't interview, or the like whatever it is that's the big case maker breaker. I'm never going to find that in a fed case because they have resources that our local law enforcement don't. But when I do state cases, a lot of the time there are a few holes. And so sometimes with the state cases, I am able to talk to that person, or I am able to get the interview, or I am able to find the video from the place with the surveillance camera. But that's just, like I said, that's just generally not going to happen in federal cases. But federal cases are so interesting to work, and there's so much involved, and just the quality of the investigation is so different that I love working them both, but just for completely separate reasons. I like murders a lot. Murders. They're just so involved, and there's so many pieces, and nothing is ever very cut and dry. And I think a lot of the times, the more complex and difficult and the more confusing it is, the more I like it, if that makes sense. So, I encourage questions, and I'm happy to help answer any questions or send you guys to someone who might have better answers or anything at all.